The wind had teeth that night. It howled down from the canyon ridges, stirring the dust and bending the dying cottonwoods that lined Jedediah Calloway's ranch like mourners. The barn door banged open and shut, the old iron hinge screeching with every swing. Jed stood on the porch, cradling a rifle and squinting into the dark, his breath curling like smoke in the cold. Something wasn't right. He trudged across the yard, boots sinking into mud still thick from last week's flash flood. The lantern swung from his hand, throwing crooked shadows across the pasture. He hadn't heard the horses fuss, but that wind could muffle gunshots, screams, just about anything. He'd lived alone long enough to know silence could lie. When he reached the barn, the door creaked wide again, revealing only darkness inside. Jed raised the lantern. A figure lay crumpled in the straw. His finger tensed on the trigger. He waited 5, 10 seconds. The figure didn't move. No sound but the hiss of wind. Jed stepped inside, slow and quiet. The horses watched him without fuss, their eyes reflecting the light like cold marbles. That, more than anything, told him she wasn't dangerous yet. She looked like she'd fallen out of a wedding dream and into a dust storm. The dress was once white, now torn and smeared with dirt. Her hair clung wet to her face, and a boot hung half off one foot. Her hand gripped a waterlogged trunk, and wedged in her fingers was a crumpled piece of paper. He crouched beside her, felt her neck. Warm, breathing, alive. The paper had one name written in shaky script, Mrs. Jedediah Calloway. He stared at it for a long time. By the time she stirred, he'd already built a fire in the house and poured a cup of coffee gone cold. She lay curled on his old buffalo robe by the hearth, her eyes fluttering open like a spooked deer's. When she saw him, she tensed, but didn't bolt. "You're safe," Jed said. "Whatever you ran from, it's not here." She sat up slowly, cradling her side. I can't remember much. Just riding a coach. Then fire. Screams." Her voice was hoarse, every word careful. She looked down at the paper still in her hand, frowning like she'd never seen it before. "You wrote that?" he asked. "I don't know. I think so. It was in my coat." She looked up. "You're Jedediah Calloway?" "I am. I was supposed to marry you." Jed set down the cup. "I never sent for a bride." The room settled into a heavy silence. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. She didn't cry. That was the first thing Jed noticed. No tears, no dramatics. Just a deep breath and a nod like she'd expected that answer. She reached for the trunk and opened it. Inside was a second dress, neatly folded, and a pocket Bible with a name inked on the inside cover, Clara Jane. "That your name?" Jed asked. She hesitated. "Yes, Clara. You remember anything else? Where you came from?" "Abilene, I think." She blinked, trying to bring memories into focus. It was a group of us. All women. Mail-order brides headed west. But then came the darkness. Jed leaned back in his chair. He didn't like puzzles. He especially didn't like ones that bled into his home uninvited. But there was no mistaking the bruises on her wrists, thin, harsh lines like rope burns, and the raw blister along her temple. Somebody had meant her harm. That part didn't need remembering. "There was a coach robbed on the pass a day or two ago," he said. "Driver and passengers both. Town marshal rode up to see. Said the gang took everything. Nobody left alive." She looked at him, startled. "Then how? Maybe you were meant to live." That truth sat heavy between them. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "I should go," she said. Jed shook his head. "Ain't nothing out there but cold, rocks, and men who'd finish what they started. You stay here. For now." She hesitated. "You don't even know me." "Don't need to," he said. "I saw the way you looked at that fire when you woke up. You've seen something bad, and you ran from it, not toward it. That's enough for tonight." Clara nodded, folding her hands over her lap, like she was in church. The next morning came quiet and gray, the light creeping through the windows with the smell of wet soil and dying sage. Jed stepped out to check the fence line, rifle slung across his back. The horses were calm. That was a good sign. But the wind still hadn't died down. Something was still moving. When he returned, Clara was up and tending the hearth. She'd found a broom and swept the ash, cleaned the table, set the coffee right. She'd done it like she'd been living there for months. She looked up. "Hope you don't mind." Jed stared at her a long moment, then poured himself a cup. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Later that day, Jed went back to the barn. He found tracks, small boots, hers, and larger ones, fresher, too deep to be his. Someone else had been out there in the storm. Someone watching. He knelt beside the prints and ran a hand through the mud. They were still wet, not more than a few hours old. He looked toward the canyon. There were things Clara hadn't told him. Things maybe she couldn't. But if trouble was following her, it had just stepped onto his land. And Jed Calloway, widower though he was, had no intention of letting it stay. Jed had never seen a woman move like that. By mid-morning, Clara had fetched water, boiled coffee, split kindling, and stitched a broken rein with a hand steadier than any ranch hand he'd ever hired. She did it all without asking, like a woman used to pulling her weight, though the fine bones of her face, the softness behind her eyes, said she hadn't always lived hard. Jed watched from the porch, arms crossed, the ache in his leg reminding him of past winters and past regrets. He didn't trust her. Couldn't. But he also couldn't ignore the calm precision with which she worked. No fluttering, no nervous chatter, just quiet purpose, like she was waiting for something, or preparing for it. When she finally spoke, it was over a tin of beans at the supper table. "I remembered something else," she said. "A man, tall, scar above his right brow, called himself Cutter." Jed looked up slowly. "He with the gang that hit the coach?" "I think so." She picked at her beans. "He said I was too soft to ride with them. Said he'd fix that on the next job. But when they started shooting, there was a little girl on that stage. They didn't care. She didn't finish. She didn't have to." Jed leaned back. "You rode with outlaws?" "I rode with men I planned to betray." Her voice was steel. "They killed someone close to me. Joining them was the only way I'd ever get close enough to even the scales." "You a lawman?" "No," she said. "Not anymore." He studied her. The set of her jaw. The flicker of something old and dangerous behind her calm. She wasn't lying. Or if she was, it was the kind of lie that came from survival. Jed pushed his plate away. "Then why'd they spare you?" "They didn't," she said. "They tied me up, left me in a gulch to die. Said I'd outlived my usefulness. I worked my way loose and stumbled toward the nearest ranch. Yours." He nodded once, slow. "I should leave," Clara said. "They'll come looking. If they haven't already." "They have," Jed said. "I found tracks. Someone was near the barn before sunrise, probably scouting." Her lips thinned. "Then I have to go." "No," Jed said firmly. "You're staying." She stared at him, confused. "Why? You don't owe me anything." He stood, limped to the window, and looked out toward the distant ridge. "My wife died 3 years back. Influenza. Nothing heroic about it, just slow, quiet suffering. She was the brave one, though. Used to say the land didn't need strong backs. It needed stubborn hearts." He turned. "I'm stubborn. I don't run from things that threaten my land, or the people on it." Clara rose to her feet. "That makes you a fool." "Maybe. But if you leave, you'll die. And they'll keep doing what they do. That makes you the fool." Silence stretched long. Then, finally, Clara sat down. "We can't outgun them," she said. "There's at least 4. Maybe 5. They're killers, Jed. I'm not proposing a war. Just a delay. Time enough to figure out who they are, where they're going. Let the marshal in town know. Maybe set a trap." She looked at him, doubtful. "The law doesn't scare men like Cutter." "No," Jed agreed. "But something else might." The next day, a knock came at dawn. Jed opened the door to find 3 men on horseback and 1 deputy flashing a badge. Their leader, Marshal Kelby, was a wiry man with sharp eyes and a face that looked permanently unimpressed by the world. "You Jedediah Calloway?" "I am. We're looking for a woman. Late 20s, brown hair, about so tall." He gestured roughly. "Might have come from Abilene. Escaped from a robbery 2 nights ago." Her and a trunk full of mail-order bride letters. Jed didn't flinch. She's my wife. Kelby blinked. You say what now? We were married last night. There was a pause long enough to taste. Jed felt Clara step behind him. She wore a linen shawl and a quiet, unreadable face. But when he glanced sideways, her hand slid into his, without hesitation. That's so? The marshal asked. Jed nodded. She's still shaken, but she'll talk when she's ready. Kelby looked between them. His deputy shifted in the saddle. Folks said she was running. Looked half dead. Jed met the marshal's gaze. She was. After a moment, Kelby sighed. Fine. But if you hear anything, if she remembers anything, you come to town. Of course, Jed said. The horses turned. Dust kicked up as they rode off. Jed didn't breathe until they disappeared behind the cottonwoods. Inside, Clara sat on the edge of the table. Why'd you do that? Didn't see another way. That wasn't a lie you told, she said. That was a vow. Jed looked at her. I've made worse ones. That night, Clara cooked while Jed patched a hole in the barn roof. The wind had shifted, less frantic now, more like a warning hush. Coyotes yipped in the far hills. The land held its breath. Over stew and bread, Clara said. You ever kill a man? Jed's jaw tightened. Only once. A rustler. Shot my neighbor. Took 3 shots to put him down. I still see his face some nights. She nodded. Then you're not like them. I don't need to be, he said, but I might need to act like it. She gave him a strange look, half amusement, half sadness. You've got a good heart, Jed. That's rare out here. He looked away. That's not always a compliment. The next morning, he found her in the field, practicing with his rifle. She stood like she'd been born with a weapon in her hand, feet planted, eyes cold, breath even. She fired once, hit a jackrabbit dead through the neck. Didn't even blink. Jed stepped up beside her. That a skill you picked up after joining the gang? No, she said. My father taught me. He was a Texas Ranger. Jed let out a low whistle. That explains a lot. He died last year, she said quietly. Ambushed on patrol. The gang I joined, their leader had his badge strung on a necklace. That's why I got close. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Reinforced the barn. Hid the horses. Set traps in the hills. Clara rigged a wire line between fence posts. Showed Jed how to trigger a fire trap, using a bottle of kerosene and a rusted tin lamp. He watched her with growing unease and respect. She wasn't just capable. She was trained, measured, deadly, and she'd buried it all beneath a white dress and a quiet story. As dusk fell, Jed lit a lantern and sat by the window. Clara joined him, sitting close but not touching. If they come, he said, we make our stand here. But if it goes bad? No, she said. If it goes bad, we finish it together. He looked at her. She meant it. Then we're agreed, he said. She nodded. A deal made by dawn, sealed in silence. And somewhere, just beyond the rise, vengeance rode closer with every hour. The desert didn't whisper that night, it howled. Wind rushed down from the hills, like it was chasing something. The stars were buried behind bruised clouds, and every pine along the ridgeline bowed, as if bracing for what was coming. Jed sat alone at the table, oil lamp sputtering, a shotgun across his knees. Clara paced in the barn. She hadn't spoken since sundown. A coyote screamed in the distance, too sharp for hunger. Jed knew the sound. A warning. Clara reappeared at the door, dressed in black, her hair pulled back, and her eyes cold. Not just focused, hollowed out. She carried the rifle across her back, and a revolver at her hip that Jed hadn't seen before. You sure you're ready for this? He asked. No, she said, but I've been waiting for it. The land fell into a hush. Then came the hooves. For riders, just as she'd said. Dust kicked up like smoke behind them, even under moonless skies. Jed watched from the window, breath low, heart thudding slow and heavy. These weren't drifting outlaws. They moved with purpose, formation, discipline. A rider at each corner, one hanging back. Flankers. They were hunting. Clara stood beside him, still as death. The lead horse stopped 30 yards from the house. A tall man dismounted, broad shoulders, dark coat, rifle slung low. Even in the gloom, Jed could see the glint of metal stitched into his lapel. Ranger's badge, bent and blackened. "Cutter," Clara whispered. He stepped forward, voice loud and oily. "Evening. You got my girl inside." Jed stood, threw open the door, and stepped out onto the porch, the shotgun hanging loose in his hand. "You're trespassing." Cutter smiled. "I'm collecting what's mine. She's got something that belongs to me." "She's my wife," Jed said. "You got no claim here." The lie tasted like blood, but it held firm. Behind him, Clara stepped into the doorway, pistol at her side. "Your wife." Cutter laughed, genuine and low. "Ain't that sweet? What did she do? Cry on your shoulder long enough to earn a ring?" "She earned a place at my table," Jed said. "That's more than I can say for you." The other riders shifted, their horses uneasy. Cutter raised a hand. Stillness returned. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be," he said. "She knows why I came." Clara's voice cut clean through the air. "You came because you're afraid." That froze him. She stepped forward now, down the steps, boots crunching gravel. "You wear my father's badge like a trophy, but you forget who he taught." Cutter's smile vanished. Jed caught the twitch in Cutter's hand too late. The outlaw's rifle came up fast. But Clara was faster. Her shot cracked the night open. Cutter staggered backward, shoulders shattered, rifle tumbling from his grasp. His horse shrieked and bolted. The other scrambled, drawing steel. But Jed was already moving, shotgun roaring. One rider went down, screaming, as pellets tore through his chest. Clara pivoted, took the second with a gut shot that knocked him from his saddle. The third turned to flee, but ran straight into the wire snare Clara had laid by the corral. His mount screamed and reared, throwing him hard onto a jagged stump. Silence came again. Cutter groaned in the dust, crawling, blood leaking from his shoulder. Jed stepped forward, shotgun still warm. Clara knelt beside the fallen leader. "You remember my father?" she asked softly. "Sam Wilder. You left him to die after you set that fire in Galena." Cutter's lip curled. "Should have shot you when I had the chance." "You did," she said. "You just missed." She stood, then reached down, not for her pistol, but for the tarnished badge. With a twist, she ripped it from his coat and turned away. "Jed," she said. He understood without needing to ask. She didn't want to kill him. That would be mercy. They left Cutter groaning in the dirt, bleeding and broken, and walked into the house without another word. Inside, Clara collapsed into the nearest chair, trembling now that the storm had passed. Jed crouched beside her. "You okay?" "No," she said, voice brittle. "But I will be." He brought her water. She drank it slowly, eyes distant. "You really were a ranger's daughter," he said. She nodded. "He raised me like a son after my mother died. Said justice didn't care about gender. Only grit." "You've got both," Jed said quietly. She looked at him, truly looked. "You married me to save me." "No," he said. "I married you to give us both something to stand on." She closed her eyes. Later, they buried the bodies behind the barn. No markers, just rocks. The wind sang through the posts as they worked, sun rising slow behind the hills. "Marshal's gonna come back," Clara said. "They'll ask questions." "I'll answer them," Jed said, "with the truth. That I was a liar, a thief. No," he said, "that you were a woman who stood her ground." She watched him, and something cracked in her expression. A softening, or maybe surrender. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Marrying you?" He paused. "No, not even a little." She turned away, but he caught the trace of a smile. For now, the threat was buried, but they both knew the desert didn't forget. It remembered every footfall, every drop of blood, and somewhere beyond the horizon, more men like Cutter roamed. More battles waited. But Clara Wilder had stopped running, and Jedediah Calloway had found a reason to fight again. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, the desert had quieted. The dust was settled, the bodies buried, and the house was once again just a house. Small, leaning a little, but standing. The only sign of the night's violence was the fresh earth near the barn and the clean edge in Clara's eyes. Jed brewed coffee while the sky turned pale. He didn't speak until she did. "I should go," Clara said from the porch, where she watched the hills as if waiting for something else to crest them. "I've caused enough trouble here." "You didn't cause trouble," Jed replied, not looking up. "You ended it." She turned toward him. "You think folks will see it that way?" "I don't much care what they see," he said. "I care what I know." She stepped inside, the wood floor creaking beneath her boots. The place was simple: a table, a stove, 2 chairs, a bed in the corner. It hadn't changed since she arrived, but it felt different now, like she wasn't passing through anymore. "I've never stayed long anywhere," she said, her voice low. "Didn't know how. My father always said the law moves slower than the devil, so you got to keep ahead of both." Jed poured 2 mugs, slid one toward her. "Your father sounds like a wise man." He was, until the day Cutter came around. Then he died choking on smoke, and I ran from the ashes. She took the coffee but didn't drink. Her eyes rested on the worn ring Jed had given her in the dark, the one that had sealed their lie to keep her safe. Funny how lies could grow roots. "I'm not that girl who came crawling into your barn anymore," she said. "I'm not someone who needs saving." Jed met her gaze, steady and sure. "Didn't say you were. But everyone needs somewhere to rest." Clara sat down, fingers wrapped around the warm tin of her cup. "The badge I took off Cutter, it belonged to my father. He gave it to him the day they deputized Cutter for the Northern Run. Trusted him. Called him brother." Jed nodded. "He betrayed you both." "I want to take that badge to Galena," she said. "Put it on my father's grave. Let folks there know the truth." "I'll ride with you." She blinked. "You don't have to." "I know," he said, "but I want to." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid, of choices still settling into place. "You never asked what I did before all this," Jed said after a while. "Before I started tending chickens and patching fences." Clara tilted her head. "What did you do?" "I fought in the war. Wore blue. Came home with half my unit gone and no family waiting. Built this place out of grief. Worked the land because it didn't ask for more than I could give. And now," Jed smiled faintly, "now I've got a reason to give more." Clara looked down at the table, then out the window toward the hills. "You think we'll be safe?" "No," Jed said plainly, "but I think we'll be ready." That made her laugh, a short, breathy sound that surprised even her. "All right," she said. "Galena first. Then we see what's next." Jed stood and reached for his coat. "We'll leave tomorrow. After supper." "Supper? You cook," he said. "I'll fix the fence. Fair trade." She watched him for a long beat, then finally took a sip of coffee. "All right, Jedediah Calloway. Deal." The day passed with quiet industry. Jed worked the north pasture where the posts had fallen during last week's storm, hammer swinging, sweat tracing lines in the dust. Clara went into town for supplies, riding Jed's old mare, had pulled low, revolver at her side. When she returned, the townsfolk watched her different, but none spoke a word. They'd heard the gunfire. They knew something had changed. By nightfall, she was back, a pot of stew bubbling on the stove and 2 place settings laid with care. Jed washed his hands at the pump and joined her as the stars came out. They ate in silence at first. Then Clara said, "Do you think folks will believe us married for real?" Jed shrugged. "We are, far as I'm concerned." She smiled softly, not mocking. "You still want a bride who came to you in a storm, carrying secrets and guns." He met her gaze. "Only if she stays." Clara didn't answer. She simply stood, walked around the table, and sat beside him instead of across. The lamp flickered, wind brushing against the windows, but inside the cabin there was warmth and steadiness, and something just beginning. She leaned her head against his shoulder. For the first time in years, she wasn't running. Not from Cutter. Not from the past. Not from herself. And for the first time since building the place, Jed looked around the cabin and didn't feel the echo of what was lost, but the promise of what could remain. The bride stayed. And in the silence after supper, the land listened, quiet content. But out past the hills, beyond where the stars touched stone, trouble was always riding. And when it came, it would find them side by side, ready, unafraid, together.